Welcome to the Lower Richland Heritage and Genealogy Society meeting. Today's speaker will be Dr. Walter Curry, and the topic is on how to write your family history. So thank you so much, Dr. Curry. Thank you, guests, for coming out. And Dr. Curry, take it up. Take it over.
Thank you for inviting me, Rose. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Deidre, for setting everything up. Just want to say good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to share with you my knowledge of family history, and certainly I am very ecstatic to really promote my work here in Richland County. And the bulk of my research focuses on my family history in Aiken and Orangeburg County. But my latest book focused heavily on Richland County. And I'm going to share some Richland County history, which will be used as an example during this presentation. And so I'm grateful to be here, and let's get started. Okay. All right. So today's presentation topic is called Writing Your Family History Book. And when we think about writing our family history, there are many approaches that we can use to do that. What I have discovered, according to the research that I have gathered, that a formal approach in writing your family history is very, very important, because you want to look at your research, number one, and number two, you also want to look at how you will structure your research to produce your writing. And so this presentation will focus on the narrative history approach. And you see the book cover, which is my second book that I published last year, The Awakening, the Seawright-Ellison Family Saga, Volume 1, A Narrative History, will be used as an example during this presentation. And so the presentation agenda, we will be looking at defining narrative history in relation to writing family history, the biographical outline, exemplary model, which is my book, using the biographical outline, writing your narrative history, chronological biography, and we will conclude with a Q&A, questions and answer. My experience as a narrator, you look at this character here, narrator Smurf. Those of us who know about the Smurf cartoons, narrator Smurf plays a very important role because he tells the stories and the history of Smurf Village. And you can see him with the scroll. He's holding it on his hand. Family history begins with narration. When we think about family history, we think about questions that we have about our family history. Some of these questions, like, did you know? Wow, when I was younger, listen to this. And we begin to question about who we are. We begin to question about who our grandparents were, our ancestors and other relatives. So when we begin to question, then we begin to seek answers. And when we begin to see answers, then we compile those answers into narration. Then narration leads to research. And then research leads to writing. And so narrative history, how it's defined, narrative history is the practice of writing history in a story-based form. It tends to entail history writing based on reconstructing a series of short-term events about individuals or specific events in a broader context. And so when we look at narrative history, to summarize it, it's basically writing stories about individuals and specific events. For instance, you look at history in general. When we read about African American history, the biographies of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, those biographies are considered to be narrative history because those biographies about those individuals are a series of short-term events or specific events in a broader context, whether it's the civil rights movement, whether it's the Black nationalist movement, writing about those events constitute narrative history as well. What is one of the primary approaches in writing family history using the narrative approach? Like I mentioned previously, there are many approaches in writing family history, but the most simple approach that I have found is the biographical approach. And it's defined as dealing with a person's individual life. And so when we look at biography and family history, we're writing stories about our loved ones, our mother, our father, other relatives. And one thing I like about the biographical approach is that it is easier to focus on an individual to gather information about that particular individual. And so we're going to explore the biographical outline, because in order for you to begin to write about your family history using the biographical approach, you have to have an outline. And an outline is very, very important. And so these are the elements of a biographical outline, focusing on an individual in your family history. And so basic facts, birth, childhood, adult life, individual death circumstances, interesting facts or anecdotes, historical context, quotes about the individual, if applicable, and sources. And so in your biographical outline, there are 5 important elements that you need to include under basic facts. Date and place of birth of the individual, parents, the individual parents and siblings if applicable, educational background, marital status, single, married, separated, divorced, or widowed, and children if applicable. Basic facts continue, religious affiliation, professional or work experience, major achievements if applicable, military service if applicable, club or organization membership if applicable. And so these elements constitute the basic facts that you want to have about your particular relative in writing a biography outline. You also want to include one of the elements, birth and childhood, providing details about the time and place the individual was raised will give your readers historical or social context and interesting and important facts about their childhood. Their adult life. The majority of the individual's biography is probably going to focus on the individual's adult life, particularly when significant events started to unfold. And you also want to focus on notable events, such as the start of a relationship, a dramatic life change, or another major turning point. And you also want to provide details about the time and place the individual was raised. And it will also give your readers historical and social context and interesting or important facts about their adult life. Individual death circumstances, the date of the individual death, the circumstances or events that led to an individual death. And you can find this information on the individual death certificate. Ancestry.com, more than likely, if you locate your relative or able to find your relative on Ancestry.com, you more than likely you'll be able to identify their death certificate. And usually the death certificate will list how the person passed away and who buried them and so forth. Interesting facts or anecdotes. It's important that you include in your outline interesting stories about the individual life, selecting things that will be engaging to the readers, particularly relevant to the purpose for which the biography is being written. So you want to key in on facts. So for instance, a relative who loved to go fishing, other interesting facts that could really bring that individual out. Historical context, which is very, very important. And so when you look at historical context, it refers to the social, religious, economic, and political conditions that existed during a certain time and place. And so let's say you find an ancestor, a relative who lived during the Jim Crow era. You want to include that in the outline. You want to do some research about the Jim Crow era and how the Jim Crow era affected your ancestor or relative during that particular time. So historical context is very, very important. Quotes about the person, if applicable. If the person has been the subject of articles, books, or news stories, consider working in a few quotes illustrating what others have said about the individual. You also want to consider quotes that you have remembered from the individual or what others remember from the individual. So quotes are very, very important, and begin to look at those quotes as a way of how the individual express themselves during their life experiences. Even when you talk about news stories, www.newspaper.com is an excellent resource where you could locate articles about your individual. If they've done something significant historically or in the community, you'd be surprised what you will find about your family member. The sources. It's very important on your outline that you reference sources, whether it's oral histories, letters or diaries, obituaries, birth, death certificates, military records, secondary sources, historical books, newspapers, articles, and educational records. And these sources may vary depending on the extent of your research. One of the things that I've learned is that you must start from where you are. And so anything that you have, whether it's obituaries or histories that you remembered or recorded, or letters or diaries or birth certificates, anything that you have right now, you could start there and to build upon. And so the biographical outline, and before I go into this next section, I will be sending a biographical outline that each of you can use for your research. And so this exemplary model is my book, The Awakening, and I'm going to go into some real examples on how I've used the biographical outline to write the biographies of my family. And so I'm going to go into the basic facts. My great-grandfather, Robert Lee Seawright, there's a chapter in the book about his life. And if you look at the date and place of birth, September the 9th, 1905 in Sally, South Carolina. I also identified his parents and siblings, educational background, 7th grade, marital status. He was married. This is the name of his wife and his children. And so as you can see, the outline is real simple. And most of this came from the sources, Ancestry.com, the census records, oral history, things that I remember, other sources of information. And so that's why it's important to have those sources available to do your biographical outline. And basic facts, religious affiliation, professional work experience. He was a farmer. Major achievements, I put NA. He didn't serve in the military. Club and organizational membership. He was a member of several churches, Smyrna and Antioch. And so the birth and childhood, and the next examples of this will come from basically examples from the book. And so you look at, let's see here. Historical context, okay? And so when I mention about historical context, basically providing the history or the social context at that particular time. And so my great-grandfather's grandmother, Martha, she grew up in the Barnwell district. And so the historical context focused on what was going on in the Barnwell district and what was happening there economically. And so this is an example of historical context of birth and childhood. And this is another example of important facts from childhood, providing details about the time and the place where the individual was raised. My grandfather, Wallace, who attended Gunridge School in Wagner, South Carolina. And it goes into his educational background. Adult life here, focus on notable events. This here is an example of in the book about my grandfather, churches. He met my grandmother at Friendship Baptist Church. So this is an example of notable events, a start of a relationship. Individual death circumstances, meaning the circumstances or events that led to an individual death. And so this is an example from the book, what happened to my great-grandfather. Talks about the fact that he passed out on the shopping trip and he died on July the 7th, 1960. Individual death circumstances. Interesting facts or anecdotes, amusing stories about an individual life. And this is an example from the book. One day during a large gathering at Smyrna Missionary Baptist Church, and this was an account when my great-grandfather was in an altercation with his friend. and they were fighting over the liquor, and it didn't go well at the end. And another example of historical context, and this is right here in Columbia. When my great-grandfather moved from Sally to Columbia, and he moved in early 1942 during World War II. And the Olympia Mills, which is downtown Columbia, was called Pacific Mills at that time. And so they were hiring laborers to work in the mills. And at the time, Pacific Mills produced over 350 million yards of fabric for the war effort. And so this is an example of how to bridge historical context in your writing. Quotes about the person. Some of the quotes that I remember that was said to me about my great-grandfather. Some of the quotes, for example, Robert watched and said, "There go old Andrew Rowe fighting now," his brother-in-law. And this is a quote that my grandmother said to my grandfather about how they met. And so these quotes bring out the stories as well about a particular person. And the sources. I also document the sources that I use too. Several of the sources, Ancestry.com, I use heavily, particularly with the census records, and some primary source documents that I've used as well. Family Search is another site, just like Ancestry.com, and also newspapers.com, which I mentioned is a good place to locate sources if you could find about your family member to write the biography, particularly obituaries and historical context as well. And so you look at the biographical outline worksheet that I just mentioned, some tips that I want to share with you. MOB, the month, date, and the year. You definitely want to include month, date, and year of important events and facts in your relative biography. That's very, very important. And you also want to gather your sources, newspaper articles, census records. And so the next section will focus on writing your narrative history, the chronological biography, once you finish the outline. And what is a chronological biography? One of the simplest ways to structure your biography and develop a narrative is chronologically, in the order that it happened. In this case, you will basically start at the beginning of your timeline and work your way through from birth to the present day. And so, how do you write a biography in chronological order? Most biographies are written in chronological or time order, from birth and childhood, adult life, and circumstances that lead to the individual death. And so you want to use the information from your biographical outline to begin writing your biography. And in writing your biography, you want to begin writing about the birth and childhood of the individual, then their adult life and circumstances that led to the individual death. And most of the information that you will get about the individual birth and childhood, the adult life and circumstances, you will get from your biographical outline. And you also want to have your sources available. So you want to start from where you are and go from there. Many biographies are mainly written in third person. And so biographies, you want to use the individual name and third person pronouns. He, she, his, hers, him, and her, rather than first person pronouns, I and me. And so this is an example from the book, Third Person. As you can see, Robert, using his name, his, the pronouns, his here, Robert, Robert, his, he, his. So as you can see, I'm using the pronouns, he, his, and the first name, Robert. And this is an example of third person. In some cases, biographies can be written in first person. First person point of view is often used in telling a personal narrative, whether the writing is telling a story or relating an experience. And so from this perspective, the writer becomes the focal point. Usually first person pronouns include I, we, me, us, my, mine, our, and ours. And so this is an example from the book of using first person. And this example is basically a reflection. And so I found, which is me, a death certificate of Dave Seawright. And then here it says, I noticed that the document confirmed he was married and buried at Smyrna Missionary Baptist Church. And so you could use first person in some cases, particularly if you want to add a reflection to your biography. And so at this time, this concludes my presentation on writing your family history using the narrative approach. And I am happy to entertain questions.
Deidre, do you want to read the questions that have been posted? Start with that.
Yes, and if Dr. Curry, I guess, can stop sharing his screen so he can be on screen. All right, here we go. I have the first question here. Okay, is Dr. Curry still showing or is it me who's up?
He's showing.
Yes, I'm showing.
Okay, all right. So the first question we have here is, by Cynthia Green, do you have any applications or templates that you recommend?
Yes, I do. In fact, what I mentioned during the presentation that I have a biographical outline, a template that I'll be happy to share with everyone. And that's very, very important because to write a biography about your relative, you definitely have to have an outline or a template. I would definitely share that. And the good thing about writing your thoughts in a template, it gives you structure. It gives you a sense of understanding about how to write about your particular individual in your family. And I also have my book, which I'm going to share after the end of the program, which is an example how I use the narrative history approach in writing biographies about my relatives.
Okay. Next question from Brenda Kinsler. Would you recommend an inclusion of an appendix when writing the biography?
Yes, I agree with that. In fact, I'm going to create another presentation that focuses on an appendix. In my latest book and my first book, I have an appendix. And the appendix basically includes pictures, primary sources, obituaries, other sources of information that adds value to the individual, but also add value to the book as a whole.
All right. And our next question is from one of our previous speakers and an author, Pat McNeely. Here's her question. If there is a discrepancy between names and dates on tombstones and wills and other documents, what do you do?
That's a great question. When you look at discrepancies on tombstones, for instance, and I'm going to speak from my experience. I remember going to my family church, Smyrna, and my ancestor, Martha Ellison, she was born on the tombstone. It says that she was born on November the 20th, 1839. And she died on November the 3rd, 1924. And so I said to myself, okay, that's interesting. She lived a long life. And then then the tombstone of her second husband, Joseph Ellison, it says that he was born on December of 1863. And so I concluded that, 1839 and 1863 is a large age gap. And for many years, I believed that she was born in 1839 until I located her death certificate on Ancestry.com. And I found that she was not born in 1839. She was born on November 20th, 1849. And the informant was her son, Rome Ellison. And so I took the death certificate as fact because of the age difference. And so she was 14 years older than her second husband, which is kind of quite accurate there. And talking to senior members in the family, they have concluded that she was born on 1849 instead of 1839. And so you have to cross-reference your sources because sometimes the tombstones may not have the accurate dates. So that way, you have to look at death certificates. You may even have to go beyond death certificates and look at birth certificates if you're able to find them. And so there are a lot of cross references that you have to use in order to get the correct information.
All right, that was excellent. The next question is, and I've actually seen that happen too with errors on tombstones.
Right.
The next question is from Latika Lee. How do you cite the oral history that you might hear from your family members?
That's a great question. There's a book out there, and I'll share it with everybody. It's called the Genealogical Proof Standards. It's written by an organization that focuses on the ethics of genealogical research. And the Genealogical Proof Standards will help you properly cite references. In my experience, what I've found in doing some research, that when you cite oral history, you want to first identify the person, where you got the oral history from, and the person relationship to you, whether that person is a great aunt, a grandfather, aunt, uncle, or cousin. You definitely want to reference that. You also may want to reference the genealogical relationship. Is this person in your family, for instance, is the granddaughter of so-and-so, or the great-granddaughter of so-and-so. And the time, date and time when you met this person and received the oral history. If it's someone outside your family, you also want to state the relationship as well. Is the person, for instance, let's say my grandfather, Wallace Seawright, who was a deacon at Baltonville. If I want to interview a deacon who remembered my grandfather, I will state that person's name, the relationship to my grandfather, the date and time that I received the information, and include the church as well. So that gives me a record, and it also gives people a record of where and who you got the information from.
Okay. Next question is from Tanya McCoy. When you find two birth certificates different in two different counties for the same person, do you list both?
Two birth certificates from the same county.
Two different counties, but it's the same person.
It's the same person. It depends on the circumstances. And again, if you feel like you need to do that, then do that. If not, then that's when you have to do some discernment. I'll give you another example. My great grandmother had a half sister named Lamanda Thompson Williams. For many years, I thought that was her sister, and she died back in 2005. And on her obituary, it listed two birth dates. Okay. And her daughter told me, she said, Cousin Walter, I don't know when my mother was born, because there were 2 birth dates. And so what she decided to do was to locate the birth certificates of her mother. And she decided to use those birth certificates and the date of birth from those certificates as part of the record. That was her discretion. But when you look at other situations, if it's involved something legal, like a will or other things that relate to the law, then that's when you have to get some legal advice and use some discernment to identify which birth certificate to use if there's a legal situation that arises of about the individual. But for research purposes, it's based on your discretion.
Okay, here's a question from Cynthia Green. What database are you using to store information that you collect from various sources? And how are you archiving the information to maintain it in a searchable file?
That's a great question. For me, when I started out, I used and created my own database. And at the time, I did not look at other formal databases that are currently out there to gather my research. But I also use Ancestry.com. They have a simple database that you could use. In fact, you could actually store the sources that you find on Ancestry.com. And you could always go back and locate your sources. So that's the only database that I've used to store my records. Ancestry.com, you could definitely save death certificates, census records. And one thing I like about Ancestry.com is you can key in the information. For instance, let's say I found a death certificate on so-and-so. Well, I could save it. I could key that person in, the whole 9 yards. And that way it gives me a source where of the information. So Ancestry.com has an excellent algorithm for you to save all of the sources that you locate there. But starting in this work, I created my own database based on my outline and so forth.
Let's see. Okay. Thank you for answering those questions. And here's another one. But I think it seems like it's framed in terms of research. And I know your topic of discussion is writing your family biography. So I hope you can reframe this and answer it in that way. This is from Taretha Wright. Both of my parents' birth dates are wrong on the birth certificates because of errors by the officials who recorded them, thus making their tombstones wrong. How do you rectify this? And I guess in terms of you're writing a biography, you can kind of source that. I think that's what you would kind of do. I don't know if you know anything about how you would rectify that as far as officially, but as far as unofficially with your biography, I'm sure you can answer that.
Yes, that's a great question. How do you rectify it? I think again, you also have to look at the tombstone record, and if the tombstone records have the birth and the death dates wrong, then you have to look at other sources of information. I think in this case, primary sources are very, very important. And so family Bibles is one way. It could, and the one thing I like about family Bibles, the person who recorded the information in the family Bible is an eyewitness. And if that person say, okay, Joshua Corley was born on November 24th, 1880, and the tombstone said that Joshua Corley was born on November 26th. If that person who remembered Joshua Corley and recorded that information in the family Bible, I will go with that person because that person knew Joshua Corley, and Joshua Corley told that person about his date of birth. That's strong evidence. Or the death certificates. The death certificates usually will date the date of birth of a particular individual. Some death certificates don't do that, all depending on the informant. Whoever told the undertaker about the person's birth or death, that's what the information was given to the undertaker to include in the death certificate. And even when you look at birth certificates in South Carolina, I know in my research, many relatives had delayed birth certificates. A lot of those delayed birth certificates can be found on ancestry.com too. Okay, and you could easily identify a relative, and usually on those delayed birth certificates, it will mention birth date came from the family Bible. And so there's a lot of scenarios that you have to consider in order to get the correct answer that you're looking for. But as far as writing your biography on a particular relative, to me, I will go based on the evidence that I have, and if the evidence that I have concludes that this birth date is credible, then I will go with that.
See, are there any other questions? I see a comment there from Linda Jones about using legacy. Are there any other questions for Dr. Curry? I don't see any, Dr. Curry. Thank you so much for all, you gave out such an awesome amount of information. And I also appreciate you as a speaker giving us a free download that you're going to provide for us. I guess you'll send us the link later. That's awesome. We love freebies. So yes, thank you for that gift for everybody that we can all use. And thank you for all of the information. I specifically like the part where you talked about sourcing, citing your sources, basically, even if it's a story that's passed down or whatever it is, cite your source, because it's so much, you protect the integrity of the information you gather by citing that source. So thank you for that. Rose, do you have anything you want to say?
I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Curry. We appreciate it. Getting a lot of good feedback. we're looking forward to getting that template.
Right.
So that we can start writing our stories versus just documenting our stories. So for me, the presentation was exciting, and someone had to tune out. Her name was Tamara Lanier, and this is just going to bring up for our next meeting, which is going to be the third Sunday in May. And it's going to be about Renty and Delia Taylor. They were enslaved by Colonel Thomas Taylor and Benjamin Franklin Taylor. And Tamara has a lawsuit against Harvard to get the daguerreotypes back, get ownership of them. And Ben Crump is her attorney. It's one of the attorneys on the team, and she's going to try to get him to chime in on it. So we'll keep you updated on our website, our Facebook page, and let you know when it's going to happen and reminders to, sign up. The other thing too is Dr. Curry also has 2 books. You have another one on the way, correct?
I'm working on a third one. I'll tell you one thing about, there's one thing about writing family books, I appreciate that, Rose, is that it takes so much out of you. And so when you all begin to write your family history book, you will definitely see that, because it's a very iterative process. It's back and forth and revising and contextualizing and gathering all of the sources together. And my point is that you definitely want to look at and see what others have done before you. That's how I was able to publish both of my books. I saw what others did, how they approach their writing of family history. And I was able to do that. And in both of my books, I would like for you all to pay attention to the citing, because I use sources that I cite in the book, whether it's oral history, whether it's ancestry.com, whether it's an interview from a relative or someone who knew my relative, or anyone who shared information in an informal conversation, of death certificates. I mean, the whole 9 yards. You will see how everything kind of connects together. So I always reiterate that in reading my books, you will definitely see how I properly cite the sources. And there are many sources out there, meaning helping you to do family history research, helping you to write your family history book. I will also share references along with the template that you could use to get started. And the biographical approach, I think, is so simple, because when we talk about our mother and our father, our grandparents, we have more than likely information available to start there. And it helps us with a structure to write about our family history by writing about the individuals in our family.
Okay, and can you let us know, Deidre's posted it, but can you let us know where we can find your books, where our listeners can find your books?
Yes, I'm gonna go back to share screen here. Let's see. And you can see this, the information about my book that I referenced, The Awakening. And the website is here. You can also purchase my first book, is available. It's www.renaissancepubllc.com.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions, statements, comments that anyone would like to share? And you can take yourself off mute and share.
I had a question.
Yes.
Is it good to make sure that when, as far as building a biography, a book of sorts, that you record any living, seasoned relatives to get accurate stories from them that will help you build and write your book?
Oh, absolutely. That is very, very important. And I mentioned that during the presentation about the importance of oral history. I have a fascination for oral history, meeting elder relatives, because they could definitely give you a wealth of knowledge, particularly about an ancestor that you're interested in. And the good thing about oral history is that oral history is very emotional and creative in how it's told. And so you could definitely feel the history when you are engaged with that person who is telling you the history. However, there are limitations to oral history. I have found that some of the oral histories that I've conducted with relatives, the history is not factually correct. And so therefore you must do some cross-referencing. Particularly when you look at oral history, you will run into relatives who will tell you wild stories and things that they've heard, or they'll tell you, well, my mama told me this, my daddy told me this. Well, my granddaddy said we ain't kin to those people. and then you find out doing the cross-referencing with primary source research that, yeah, granddaddy was wrong. Even that person who you get in the oral history could be wrong. And then you also got to be careful about recommendations, who recommend you for interviewing. For instance, you'll have some folks will say, well, talk to so-and-so about your grandfather. Well, if so-and-so information may be shaky, then that person may not be the right credible source. So I would recommend that you look at research questions, oral history research questions, or interview questions. There are a plethora of information that you could locate. You could Google oral history questions that you could ask a particular relative or a person who remember or know the relative that you want to do research on. So there are sources out there, but you definitely have to use discretion and discernment to determine what is true and what is not true in conducting oral history, and make sure that you follow up your oral history with primary sources. That's very, very important.
Another one. And also, should we be prepared for someone who may not want to share because of the pain and those stories.
I agree.
Because some people may not want to share. I have that in my own family, whereas I'll give you an example. I was doing family research for our family reunion down in Charleston, and I found my grandfather's birth certificate. Now, he lived by, as far as his name was concerned, Arnsby Francis Jones. On his birth certificate, it said Armsby Burke Jones. I brought it up in our family reunion down in Charleston, and it created an entire uproar. Even though I had the document, because we did a slideshow, the folk were not happy, and especially some of my father's siblings, because this was their dad. And going forward, I have to keep in mind that everybody may not be prepared for information you may find, or may not be prepared to share stories. And I guess I have to learn to be sensitive to that matter, or prepare myself to that I may not get the information I need based on what people may not want to share.
That's a great question. And you have to acknowledge that. I mean, particularly when you look at sensitive information, you have to consider the sensitivity of the subject matter. For my experience, what has helped me, the relationships. I'm someone who love to visit family. Doesn't matter what side of the family. I make it my interest to reach out and build relationships with different branches of the family. And over time, I have found that building those relationships with trust will help you in your research. And that's very, very important. I'm not encouraging you to give up because sometimes it's the timing of the matter. Sometimes, and I hate to say this, certain family members may have to go on to glory in order to get the truth. And I've experienced that even on my father's side. My father is dying for me to write a curry book, but it's so toxic over there. And I'm not putting the business out because I know that if I say, and he backs me and said, well, my son is gonna write a family history book based on the toxicity in the family. My aunt's going to have something to say, feel like she's the matriarch, that she should run with the ball. There's a lot of family politics that you have to consider in writing family history. And these books are on my mother's side. And I've experienced family politics as well. But I have worked around those politics by building relationships and understanding the value of time. One thing that I would like to point out too on this journey, it takes a lot of courage to do this, okay? Because you're gonna run into opposition, okay? You're gonna run into relatives who are not gonna like the fact that you're doing this. And in writing biographies, if you know sensitive information, you may not want to include that. Okay, you want to paint a balanced approach to writing a individual biography. And that's important, because again, you have to look at the dynamics in your family, and that's very, very important. What I also have found too, that family reunions, I appreciate you mentioning that, because family reunions are very, very important. Every family reunion that I've been to have had a program, a brief history about that family, which is a source that you can use. And you can use the information from a family history program or booklet as a part of your research to build on. Okay, so I encourage everyone to attend family reunions and get the information. Every family reunion that I've attended, I've learned something new that has helped me. But on this journey, you definitely want to use ethics, and one of those ethics is the relationships, the care of the information, and how it's being told, and being sensitive to the information as well.
And lastly, will you say that advice goes as well when you're building your tree?
Oh, absolutely. I tell you this, on my mother's side, kind of interesting. My great aunt, she married my great uncle, my granddaddy brother, and they had 3 children. And those 3 children are my mama's first cousins. And then she had additional children while she was married to my great uncle, because my great uncle lived in New York, and she lived down here, and she didn't want to go back to New York, and she had other children from several different men, and so they are in the Seawright name, but they're not Seawrights by blood. And so I remember when I was working on the family tree, and I asked my mom, I said, I'm going to include the cousins on the family tree. She said, well, you can include my first cousins, my uncle, the children that he had from his wife, but don't include the others. and I was like, well, why is that the case? And then my great aunt, her children that she didn't have from my great uncle, one of them came out and said, look, I'm not a Seawright, I'm a Strongman. And he was bold enough to admit that. The question becomes, again, how do you include sensitive information in the family story, which includes the family tree? And you got to look at those, dynamics, because every time we try to plan a Seawright family reunion, and people now know about the family history because of me, they want to see a tree, but you have that issue over there of my great uncle's stepchildren who are not his kids. How can we include them? So you got to have a real conversation with your family, particularly the elders, the leaders in your family, to talk about these issues and be upfront. I give you an example. When I was the president of the Thompson family reunion, my great grandmother named Thompson, I went to my great uncle's son, who I referenced, and I asked him about his siblings, his other siblings, who were not my great uncle's children. And I told him, I said, should I include them in the family tree? You know, if you say so, I will list them as his stepchildren or adopted children. He told me, he said, no, I want my daddy kids from my mom, my two brothers, and also my half siblings in North Carolina. I want all my daddy children on that family tree. And so I didn't do it, but if I would have done it, I would have followed his wishes. Why? Because he's the elder and he's the leader on his side of the family.
Dr. Curry, that's just amazing how you say that basically we are a caregiver of information and building relationships with family members so they'll feel comfortable sharing the information and know that we'll be guardians of family history and not so much interested in spilling the family tea. And so I like how you really have walked us through that, because so easy. I mean, I've run across so many different things, and I'll tell them, I said, okay, look, if you really want to know, let's talk outside of this, or let's talk outside of this family gathering or whatever. And I'll tell you what I need to tell you. I said, because I don't think you're really prepared to hear what I got to say or what I found out. And I try to do things that way because I know if I open it up, while you're at cookouts where some family members may be inebriated and you bring out information and then everything is blown to smithereens. So you're right that we are caregivers of that family history and caregivers of that information. And thank you, Adrian, for those questions. I didn't see your question down at the end, but thank you for bringing those up, because those are great points.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out. Robin?
I just wanted to say that I was glad to come. There's so many people on here that I know. It's really good, but I was glad to hear Dr. Curry speak. It's different where we meet now. We meet in Columbia meeting, but now we still get to meet.
That's right. That's right. And I just want to say, Miss Robin Foster is actually, I call her the Dean of African American of genealogy and family history. She has published a book. Robin, could you tell them about your book?
Yeah, it's just, it's called My Best Genealogy Tips. And it's just I'm putting out a series of books. And the first one are just tips that if you've been doing genealogy for a while, you appreciate getting. And if you are new, you really appreciate. So if you're new, go and get the book. It's on Amazon.
And also Pat McNeely, thanks for coming. She's another author. And look up her books. She writes some fantastic books.
Yes, we definitely are awesome. Have awesome speakers with us today, and we're so thankful for Pat McNeely and Robin Foster for being with us today. I remember when Robin started the Genealogy Just Ask. And for those of you who don't know, Robin is part of my extended family.
That's right. That's right.
She is my first cousin's mother-in-law. So we are related by marriage. And so,
yes.
But it's so awesome that I got to see when she was birthing the Genealogy Just Ask stuff. And it just blew up into something truly incredible. And so thank you, Robin, for all that you do for everybody across the international borders. I guess there are no borders with what you do with Genealogy Just Ask and with research in general.
Thank you. I better say something that my cousin is on this webinar. Ethel is my cousin. We're double cousins.
And also, we want to thank everyone who tuned in today. And thank you all for your questions. Thank you all for your input. And thank you all for joining in today. It has truly been a blessing. Dr. Curry, you really blessed us with so much valuable information. And I think those of us who may have been on the fence about writing, you kind of went ahead and knocked us on over the fence to go ahead and do it. So.
And I appreciate it. I just want to add two things. I'll also include the presentation that I have as well to share with everybody. This presentation was actually prepared by my wife, and so some of the things that she admitted that I told her to have on there. So I would definitely clean that up to make it a little more simplified for everybody to read, as well as the templates. But I want to mention something. I know, Robert, you mentioned cousin related by marriage. I'll tell you another tidbit. I remember about several years ago, I met a gentleman who's not blood related to me, but he said to me that, yeah, I'm kin to the Seawrights too, and from Aiken. And I said, well, how you kin? He said, well, my great aunt married a Seawright, and his great aunt married my great grandfather, first cousin. And so every time we see each other, he say, you know, relative or cuz. And so one of my mom's first cousins said to me that, yeah, are we related to him? You know, because every time he comes around, he's saying that we're family. I said, well, we're not blood related, but he's in the family and we're real close. And I visited his mother several times, and his mother shared with me information about my family that I didn't even know. You know, so again, it's those relationships. And you'd be surprised when you look at your ancestors, particularly those who were married. Some of them were married to families who had some influence in the community. I'll give you an example. My ancestor brother, Furman Kitchens, married Carrie Schofield Kitchens, and find out that his father-in-law donated land to Oak Spring Missionary Baptist Church. His name Jake Schofield. And, you know, so looking at that, although I'm not genealogically connected to Jake Schofield, but he's part of the family through marriage. And that could be something that I need to explore about his history, how he was able to do that. So relationships by marriage, we should not overlook them.
That is an excellent point. I know there have been times, sometimes people who are related by marriage have been married to the person 60, 70 years, and they have pictures, they have documents, they may even have your grandmama's sweater still in their closet.
Oh,
you know, so
and also, that's a great point. And let's not forget the fact that many of us are descendants of enslaved ancestors. And Ms. Foster could tell you a lot about how important to do the research on the enslavement. I can tell you, for me, that has been one of the greatest experiences for me to document the research of my ancestor enslaver and their family. They have provided me with information that I did not have prior to meeting them. And in fact, we're so close that they have invited me to their family reunion, white family, the Corleys. And then in the second book that I wrote, I was able to identify the family of of my collateral ancestors and my ancestors who were employed by them, the Corbett family. I was able to go to them, and they gave me a picture of my my third great uncle and his wife, and they were in the picture with the landowner and his family. Beautiful picture. Show you the racial reconciliation, cooperation there. So you never know who you will run into and who you need on this genealogical journey.
Okay, then, if there's anything else, again, everyone, thank you so much for showing up. Pat, if you'd like, you can share the names of your book and how we can purchase them, because they're pretty good.
Oh, there. Hey. Yeah, I'm here. Actually, it is so funny that you should be, because right in the middle of this presentation, I had a call from a professor at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga asking if I would be willing to review a book that they are getting ready to publish. And in the process, he said he needed the names, the titles of all my books. And so I was frantically trying to find them. But what is so funny about it is that he said, just say them. And he said, we'll just write them down. I said, I can't remember. I can't remember all of them. So I looked it up. And so I've just finished sending him the titles of these. I've written 9 books and I've got 3 more in the works. And we don't have enough time this afternoon for me to list all of the titles of the books that I've written, but I'm really interested in what Dr. Curry's been saying, because I've just finished writing I'm putting together, and I'm sure Dr. Curry is going to understand what I'm saying when I say this way, that I've finished gathering all of the material about my husband, and I have just finished, I'm really almost ready to publish it, and it's 512 pages. And what I've done is I've gone back and I've gathered all of his material that he started writing when he was young, and he wrote for his high school newspaper, and then he wrote for his college newspaper, and then and I've gathered all this, and then he wrote some essays later, and then he was stationed in Bamberg during during the Cold War period. This was in 1958 and 59. He was stationed in Bamberg he was an American with the American Army, but in the NATO forces, of course. And so I've been putting this all together, and it's been particularly interesting to me in view of the world situation now, seeing the few things that he wrote about being there in Bamberg in Germany, and later transferred to other places in Germany, that he wrote about being in the NATO forces. So I'm finishing that up, Dr. Curry, that I'm finishing all of the documents and all the material, and that's 512 pages long. So, and then I have also, the other thing I'm working on now is my father-in-law was in the Navy from 1916 to 1919. So he served on a ship for 4 years, and he wrote a diary. So I'm also in the process of putting that together with family pictures, a lot of family pictures. So I've been really interested in what you've been saying, Dr. Curry, and listening to what you've been saying. And I really enjoyed what you did this afternoon.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I've heard about your work as well, and very interested in learning more. And that's what it's all about. You know, we're all sharing and we're all learning from each other, because one thing about family history and genealogy, we're not an island to ourselves. And when you're on this journey, you do have to connect with people who you could share information and get insights from. So it's a blessing that we all could gather here and learn together. So it's good to see you, Ms. McNeil.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good to see you too.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, one more thing. I noticed for myself when I started doing this, say about 2008, now going into now we're into 2022, including extended family members, et cetera, finding out I had some influential ancestors within my tree connected by other family members. I made it my mission to purchase books about these individuals to help me with my family tree building. So that's been a great help for me. I know I've also found documents of my third great grandfather, the third or fourth, an article in the newspaper where him and his family members were up for auction. And I have I have a subscription to newspaper.com, and I found the articles where it listed the enslaver's name. So I built a tree on that family, and it listed, and I found that information helped to find out who those people were. And on another family member, he was part of the slave narratives. And I found a 12-page document that's now in the Library of Congress on him, and was telling how being enslaved for him as a child, and he also listed his enslaver. So I built a tree on that particular family as well. I know for me, I get so engrossed in it, but the results are rewarding.
Oh, absolutely. And Adrian, I appreciate you sharing your insights. You brought out some very critical points. Newspapers.com. I'm telling everyone, you need to get a subscription of newspapers.com. It's very, very important because, to your point, Adrian, many of those newspapers could go back into the antebellum period, Civil War, Reconstruction, and beyond. And that's important, particularly when it comes to historical context, which I mentioned. You have to connect your ancestor or relative to historical context. And the reason why I say that, because, we read about history all the time in school, during our leisure time, and we usually, read about history based on secondary sources, or what other people interpret about primary sources that they have gathered on a particular historical topic. But I have found, and many of you have probably found as well, that when your ancestor was part of a particular historical context like slavery, you will understand slavery more because you can see it through the eyes of your ancestor. Okay, even when you look at the civil rights movement, we always hear about the themes of the civil rights movement, but I have found that when I look at historical context of the civil rights movement from my family, I understand the civil rights movement better because there's a family member who experienced it, who witnessed it, and who could share it with me in a spiritual and emotional way. And so that's important to put out there. The slave narratives are very, very important. I have found a slave narrative that connects my distant cousin, Isaac Quarterbaum. There was a slave named, I think his name was John Quarterbaum, who was a slave on the Paul Quarterbaum plantation near Batesburg, South Carolina. And from what I was told, that Isaac Quarterbaum was a slave on a plantation there. Although Isaac was not mentioned in the slave narrative, but he was on that plantation. And that person who was recorded about his enslaved experiences has given me an idea of how life was for Isaac as a slave on that plantation. And so that's part of research. And so we definitely have to consider other perspectives and sources when we are doing family history.
Oh, Rose, I have one tip that that I would like to share, and I'm expecting that Dr. Curry and Robin and maybe Deidre all would know more about this than I do. But I found that when I was trying to put together the diary that my father-in-law wrote during World War I, that I could go to the library, and I don't think they have this at the downtown Richland library, but they have it at the Cooper branch on Trentham Road, and they have a machine there. Robin, I see Robin smiling. I think she may already know what I'm getting ready to say, but I took the typewritten pages of my father-in-law's diary to the library, and they have a machine there in the back that can transfer your typewritten pages to either Word or to a PDF. And it's almost like running it through a Xerox machine, and you can take a flash drive with you and you transfer it onto it, and it saves hours and hours of time. So I don't know whether any of you have run across that, but I have found that this machine that they have at the Cooper Branch Library is just fabulous.
Writing it down.
And actually, I think there's only one person there who knows how to use it, Joanna. Joanna and I have become very good friends.
Okay, so then when I go, I have to name drop.
Yeah, you have to ask for you have to be sure that Joanna's there when you go.
And mention Pat McNeely.
Well, she'll know who I am, I'm sure, but but yeah, it runs through just like a Xerox machine almost, and then it transfers. Now you have to clean it up. It has little glitches in it, but it saves you from having to type anything. And you can either have it transferred as a PDF, or you can have it transferred as an editable Word document. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was amazing.
Okay. Well, everyone, thank you so much. Somebody posted something, and Deidre, can you read it? Because
Well,
I'm on.
Linda Jones was just reiterating that, or reminding us that the 1950 U.S. Census will be released on April 1st.
Yep.
Yay, we're so excited about that. All of us who do the research, we're excited about that 1950 census. It couldn't come out fast enough for me.
Yes.
Right.
So we patiently wait.
That's right.
My question is, why does it take so long for census to be released?
It's every 72 years that they have to hold on to it for 72 years.
It can't shorten it.
And I guess to protect people that are living, just like spilling tea, you know, hopefully the person will have died or passed and no need for information. Let me ask Siri, okay?
Excuse me, do you have time to answer one more question?
Sure.
I'm Brenda Kinsler, and I don't live in the Richland County area, but my roots are there. And I'd like to know, is there a way that I can see what records they may have in the courthouse, like the old like probate records or any wills that they have in the courthouse, so that I can ask someone to either look it up, or if I know what it is, they can send it to me once they tell me how much it'll cost for them to reproduce it.
Yes, I can answer that. You can go to South Carolina Archives, or if there's something specifically in Richland County, you can, there is on Richland County's website, there is a way that you can pay for a subscription to access certain documents, or you can request those documents during those from that website. And there's also like a per document, there's a minor charge. Sometimes it's like 13 cents or something like that. But you can access it from the Richland County website, which is
Don't worry, I can look it up.
Yeah, and then also Richland County Public Library, get a subscription. You have to pay for it since you live outside of it, but there's a vast amount of information and things you can have access to by having a Richland County Public Library card. The website has, a ton of genealogical information.
Okay, and also, Adrian, the answer to the question is 72 years because that was the average lifespan
Oh, okay.
person, I guess, when they started releasing them.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for that information.
And
You're
also,
welcome.
Ancestry and on Family Search, I've found wills of my relatives. So you don't necessarily have to be in Richland County to do it.
Family Search, you can look up, if you go to the records, you can look up South Carolina and then Richland County, and there's wills and documents, all different kinds of documents you can look up. Wills have been most interesting to me. And also we have access to information when people who were in mental institutions as well. So you're right, Rose. Family Search also has those documents.
And if you want to know everything in your particular county, go to Family Search Wiki. That's familysearch.org, and you'll see a search at the top. Click on search, and at the very bottom, you'll see Research Wiki. And when you get to the Research Wiki, you type in what county or parish and state, and you'll get a whole page.
That is correct.
So with these library subscriptions, right? Are they different per county? Say if I'm looking for something in Kershaw County, where my mom is from, was born in Camden, and if I'm looking into Charleston County, where my father's parents were from, and those two libraries, and say whether it be Camden, whether it be Charleston, would there be different subscriptions for those libraries to get access to those libraries?
Well,
would you know?
Some libraries don't have the information that Richland County has. For that, I would just recommend you go to familysearch.org, as Robin suggested, because you'll find more information there. And then if you run into a wall there, then you could kind of, I guess, look around, even go on Robin's website's Genealogy Just Ask, and start asking people, are you in Kershaw County? Does the Kershaw County Library have this information available? Or are you in Charleston? I know has a ton of information available everywhere. Yeah, but I don't know what the libraries actually provide. Sometimes there's another nonprofit or another historical society that might have far more information than what the library offers.
And if you just go to that wiki, it tells you even about the library, it tells you about the historical society for that area.
That's a good point.
FamilySearch.org.
Yeah.
And if you have to go to the wiki on that. So when you get to FamilySearch.org, click on search, and there'll be a drop down menu. And you want to go to Research Wiki, and then put in your county and state, and hit enter.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone,
Right.
thank you so much for coming out and spending your afternoon with us. Dr. Curry, tremendous amount of information, very helpful, and I think it's going to be a motivator for a lot of folks. I know for myself, and getting started writing those stories.
Right.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. And I will definitely send everyone the copy of the presentation as well as the templates in the next couple of days.
Sounds good. And Deidre, you have the everyone's email address, correct?
Correct. If they registered, and apparently if they're in here, I should have their information, and I'll send out a message.
Yeah, you can send it to Deidre, and Deidre can get it out, or we'll figure out how to get it to everybody.
All right, so I guess that concludes our meeting for today. We want to thank you all for joining in, and you all have a wonderful Sunday afternoon.